Hello and welcome to the fourth video in my part 5 section of my Java MTA. In this video we're going to be looking at how to manage Java exceptions using the try, catch, finally code. Do remember, if you're unsure what an exception is, I suggest going back and watching my previous video on Java runtime exceptions. So let's get started. So before you can really grasp how the try, catch, finally code works, you need to have a clear idea of what a runtime error is. So in our previous videos we saw how when we encounter a runtime error, the program, the code, stops. Now sometimes these errors will occur because of something that the user has done, and we want to continue the program but we want to manage their error, and that is where the try catch code works. So we have the try and we put in the code that might produce the runtime error in there, and then we're saying if there is an exception I want this code to run, and then we can do all sorts of things with that code to try and continue the program. Importantly, this exception here, the exception E, this is creating that exception object. So again, it's very important to understand what a runtime exception is and how Java creates these exception objects. So in the last video we saw there are many different types of exceptions. So in most websites of examples you will see this very high level object exception that covers all of them. However, if you have a good idea of what exception will occur in your program, you should make it very clear which exception you'll put in. So if you're doing a lot of maths and you feel that you could be dividing by 0, you shouldn't just have the exception object there, you should have the arithmetic exception object here. So remember, this is telling you what exception class you're using, and then this will be the name of that exception object. And then finally you'll have the finally code, and this will be executed even if there's not a exception or a runtime error occurring. So hopefully now you've got a good understanding of what try does, what catch does, and what finally does. I'm going to throw some code at you now and see if you can answer the questions to cement the information we've just covered. So here we have some code. Within this code we have a try, catch, and finally code. What I want you to imagine is that we've created the class or the object of the class, and we've called the exception1 method. So when we run this code, can you answer these questions? So pause the video and see if you can answer them. So hopefully you've paused the video and you've answered the questions, so let's go through them. So what exception will occur in this code? Well, we're working with numbers, and so what we've put here is the arithmetic exception. So it's always important to be as specific as you can when writing with any kind of program. So it's not a great idea just to have exception object and for all your catch. You should really focus down on what kind of exception you think will occur based on your code. What is the name of that exception object? Well, again, I've just put it E. E is quite common. What will be printed out if I run the code? Well, if I run it, we can see here that the number is 0. You can't divide by 0, so it would produce the arithmetic exception, and so it would print that stack trace. So do remember that in the previous video we learned about the console stack trace, so it would just print out that. Again, if you don't know what the stack trace is, it's a really good tool for kind of having a look at how the error flows around the code, so it would be worth watching that video. And then once it prints out this stack trace, it will print out the final code, so we have dealt with the error. So it will print both of them out. So if I change the number value to 2, for example like this, I'll put it down here, well then this isn't divided by 0 anymore, so there is no error. So this code won't be produced. It won't be executed. So it will skip this code, but it will still do the finally code. So if we change the number 2 value to 2, we will still have this printed out. So let's look at the next piece of code to make it a little bit more challenging. So in this question, or this code, we have 2 catches, which is fine. So again, I want you to pause the video, look at this code, and then answer the questions. So hopefully you've paused the video, and let's have a look at the answers. Okay, so here you can see actually 2 errors occur at the same time, or there's 2 errors within the try code, and so these errors, these runtime errors, could produce 2 exceptions. One the arithmetic, because we're dividing by 0, and one the string index out of bounds, because we're going beyond the characters that are in this string. So it'll be interesting to see what you've done to what would be outputted. So because we encounter this, so we'll counter this error before we encounter the string index out of bounds error, the code that will be outputted would be this one. Now, if we change that value to 3, suddenly this exception wouldn't happen anymore, but the index out of bounds exception still would, because there's only 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. There's only 4. There's only 4 here. So when it's going to print at 5, there won't be a value, and so it will produce that exception. So if we change that to 3, this exception will occur, and this will be outputted. Okay, why have we added 2 catch statements? And this is because there's 2 potential exceptions that could occur in this piece of code. Now, in this code, they produce the same thing. They do the same thing. They output the same method. So potentially, what we could have done is just have an exception object for both of them, because that would have caught both of them. But if you want to have 2 different behaviors, so if you want the code to do one thing for the arithmetic exception and then do something else for the string index out of bound exception, then it is important to add the 2 catch statements. Could we change the line 15 to exception? So could we just get rid of this and have the first one as exception? Well, this wouldn't work. This would produce a compile error, because you can't have the parent class exception, you can't have the higher class and a more specific one, because it would never reach that line 18, because all of exceptions fall under the exception object. So the string index out of bound exception would also be an exception object. So you wouldn't need that line 18. So if you got rid of the line 18 and just had one catch, it would be fine. But you can't have the exception object and then another catch with another exception. So hopefully you have a good idea about the try-catch finally code in Java. If you can answer these questions, I think you've cemented the knowledge quite nicely. So are you able to explain why you use the try-catch statements? Are you able to explain the difference between the different exception objects? Because this is quite important. And have you gone on to Java and had a look at what those exception methods you can call in that catch statement? So when you create your exception objects, what kind of methods are you able to use, and what do those methods do? So again, if you found this video useful at all, please like. If you're trying to learn Java to pass the MTA and you're finding this playlist useful, please subscribe. And if you can answer one of these questions, leave a comment to help other people learning. And I'll see you in the next video.